Hey everyone, it is time to get up to date with everything that happened in the Linux, open source and privacy spaces this week. So first, System76 announced that they would push back the Cosmic Desktop Alpha because they want more time to refine the core applications. We have a massive data breach in France, exposing social security numbers and a lot more personal data on potentially 43 million French citizens. And we also have the EU backing down on trying to regulate free and open source software as if it was commercial software thanks to the Free Software Foundation. And obviously we also have this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Tuxedo. They're your all-in-one service provider if you run a Linux server or workstation fleet and you want to keep it secure, up-to-date and with minimum downtime, thanks to kernel live patching and extended support for end-of-life distributions like CentOS 7, for example. In June 2024, any system running CentOS 7 will be left without official patches or support. Organizations are now confronted with the critical need to migrate their server fleets to a new Linux distribution, and they don't have a direct upgrade path. And for this transition, you really need more time and more expertise to evaluate all the alternatives and to execute a good migration strategy. So Tuxedo introduces its extended lifecycle support for CentOS 7. It enables you to not only keep using your existing setup for as long as you need, but also to get access to seasoned Linux architects who will help you with your migration and ensure a seamless transition when you're ready. The service provides a lot of flexibility, offering up to 5 years of security patches, including for more than 60 high and critical vulnerabilities that CentOS themselves didn't fix, or a complete coverage with a 14-day security patch SLA, alongside comprehensive technical support and migration guidance. And all for just $6.45 per month per system. So click the link in the description below and get some time to prepare your migration, and know that you will be ready and you'll have some help when the time actually comes to change to something new. So it looks like the Cosmic Desktop Alpha will be pushed back. It was initially planned to release at the end of March, but it will now come in late May instead. They apparently want to make sure all the core apps that they're working on reach the minimal viable product stage. So basically something that has all the basic features, instead of pushing out a desktop alpha with half-baked applications. There will also apparently be a second alpha once some testing has been done. Now this does mean there's still some progress to talk about though. And first, hybrid graphics support is now complete, with an applet to let you see which apps are using your dedicated GPU, and the ability to close these apps so the GPU is no longer used to save battery life. Minimizing and restoring windows is also implemented now, and these windows will apparently be placed in a dedicated applet in the dock, probably similarly to what macOS does. The tiling applet is also complete, letting users enable auto-tiling for all workspaces or per workspace. Input device settings have also been implemented with features like tap to click, edge scrolling, touchpad acceleration, or selecting input sources and changing keyboard shortcuts. Now what remains is to implement drag and drop in the terminal to get file paths, plus a confirmation dialog before closing a terminal window if a process is currently running. The text editor needs to get spell checking and session restore features, and the Cosmic File Manager is also progressing nicely. And also it's the first app they've shown that has a menu bar, so it's not going to be all GNOME-style apps with header bars. You are getting these old menu bars in there. Cosmic will also support the desktop portal for dark mode and accent colors, and on top of that, the current Pop Shop, based on the Elementary OS App Center, will be replaced by a new Cosmic Store. It's a brand new Rust app, and it's apparently very fast to open and to search for applications to install in it, and it will support Flatpak. So I'm a bit sad that the alpha is being delayed. I had a video planned for the end of this month to talk about it. It will be pushed back to May, but I guess it's the best thing they could do because I would much rather take a look at a feature-complete alpha, just saying, okay, there are still some bugs, but it's normal, it's an alpha, rather than taking a look at something that is half-baked and is missing crucial features, which would not give a great first impression of that desktop. France got a giant data breach this week, with data from potentially 43 million people being grabbed by malicious actors. It's data that comes from the unemployment databases, which includes anyone who ever reported to be unemployed at some point, or wanted to receive access to training for a career change, or even just had a short period where they were in between jobs. And this data dates back 20 years. It includes things like email addresses, social security numbers, phone numbers, dates of birth, and names. So it is ripe for identity theft and fraud, and it could be linked to other data grabbed in other breaches to build even more comprehensive profiles. It is a giant problem, apparently achieved through social engineering, and the affected French service will now have to inform everyone affected. I think I'm probably in there as well, even though I never reported to unemployment services, as I never needed it fortunately, but it still might contain some of my data from some old summer jobs at some point. Now the other problem is, why is that data dating back 20 years? French laws are pretty strict for data conservation, and generally it's 10 years maximum. So the only reason I can see is to calculate pensions once you retire, but that's the only reason. Now second, these types of governmental services really need better training to handle social engineering attacks, and they need a serious cybersecurity threat assessment. No system is bulletproof, and it's also run by humans. All humans are fallible. But also, come on, it's 43 million people, you have to protect that data somehow. Now, fortunately, most important systems and websites in France will require you to use your fiscal number, so the one you use to declare taxes. The social security number is still important for everything related to healthcare, but it's not as important as your fiscal number, so it's probably not the end of the world, but it's still pretty bad. The Linux kernel 6.8 is now out. It includes the new experimental Intel Xe driver that will replace i9-15 for recent Intel GPUs in the future. The kernel also improves support for upcoming AMD hardware, CPUs and GPUs included. There's also better support for the Raspberry Pi 5, notably on the graphics side of things. The ZSwap subsystem is now able to force old pages out of the RAM when you really need that RAM available for something else. The kernel can prevent direct writes to block devices that have a mounted file system to prevent file system corruption. The Intel CPU frequency scaling will also be much better for recent CPUs, which will be able to hit their max boost speeds on Linux. And Ryzen 7000 CPUs get a fix to avoid radio frequency interference from the Wi-Fi and GPU memory clocks. Running multiple TCP connections will also be much faster as well, up to 40% faster, and you're also gaining support for the Nintendo Switch online controllers, a few gamepads and handhelds, and color management for the Steam Deck. So all in all, it is a smaller update than 6.7, but it is still a pretty important one, as it will be the default in Ubuntu 24.04, which is an LTS. It will probably also be in Fedora 40, so it's a major one. Now, while the EU generally does pretty well at regulating big companies, they also had some pretty big misses, and one of these was the Cyber Resiliency Act, which on paper was solid. It forced companies to follow procedures, to disclose vulnerabilities, and to ensure that their software is secure before commercializing it to users, with a bunch of checks and certifications to follow. And this was probably a good thing for big companies that sell proprietary software, but it was not as good for open source projects, which were regulated in the exact same way in this regulations draft, and they would basically be incapable of following the regulations or afford the audits and certifications needed. The other issue would be that the open source developers would be held liable under this new regulation if anyone using their software suffered from various attacks, even though open source licenses generally absolve developers from responsibility. The Free Software Foundation campaigned within the EU to try and get an exemption for open source and free software, and it looks like they managed to get it. Free software will have a broad exemption and will no longer be considered as commercial software through this regulation. And it looks like the liability will lie with companies who significantly benefit financially from that software instead. It is a very interesting thing because on the one hand, it means open source can keep on business as usual. You provide something as is, someone decides to use it, it's their responsibility to keep it up to date or to contribute to fix any problems. On the other hand, it also means that open source software might feel like it's not a good deal for companies who might want to add it to a commercial product because it is not covered by any of these regulations, certifications, or audits. Now, in a pretty funny investigative circle, the EU is investigating itself over data privacy and the use of big tech services. The EU Data Protection Supervisor found that the European Commission, the organism in the EU that generally deals out giant fines to Apple, Microsoft, Google, and the like, well, they found that this commission itself was in breach of data transfer rules. Turns out the European Commission uses Microsoft 365, and there are absolutely no safeguards in place to make sure the data the app collects isn't transmitted to servers outside the EU, which is a big no-no when it comes to privacy in the EU. The European Data Protection Supervisor said that the EU didn't really specify which types of data were collected by Microsoft 365 and for which purpose. The Commission has to apply corrective measures by December 9th, 2024, or to stop using Microsoft's Cloud Suite entirely. So for now, all data flows between the European Commission and Microsoft servers must be stopped, and they will have to do some data mapping to see what comes out of their use of the solution and where it goes exactly, which means they will have to work with Microsoft, and they will also have to fix the contracts they have with the company to ensure these include all the necessary safeguards for this EU data to be limited to only what is absolutely necessary for the service to run. The European Commission agreed to review all of this, but also said that compliance would undermine their current level of services because it not only applies to Microsoft products but also other services. And, well, maybe it's time to tell the EU that there are European solutions that do the exact same job as Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365 for cheaper, more privately, and are open source and probably also are based in the EU. The European Commission cannot just use one of their hands to hit every big tech company over the head and deal out fines for privacy violations, but use the other hand to actually give money to these companies and encourage them to continue this crap. They should at least review their contracts to make sure that they fit with the regulation they themselves set in place. Now, you might be aware of the lawsuit currently in process between the New York Times and OpenAI, where the former accuses the latter of scrapping their articles to train their AI without any authorization or compensation. The New York Times ran some prompts and found out that ChatGPT could just spit out entire portions of their articles or the entire article, and they used that fact to sue OpenAI. And the company's defense is pretty weird. They're saying the New York Times hired people to craft specific prompts to get ChatGPT to reproduce articles, and that people will never land on these results on their own. And the New York Times completely agrees. They say they just copy-pasted a few sentences of the article as a ChatGPT prompt. But they also say that this defense doesn't work. Yes, it is not a prompt that anyone would reasonably type, but also that's not what the lawsuit is about. No matter how you reach the state where ChatGPT reproduces the entire article, what matters is that the article is indeed reproduced, which proves OpenAI used it to train their AI without any authorization, which is what the lawsuit is about. And I don't know what OpenAI's lawyers were expecting to achieve here. It's like defending yourself against a lawsuit, arguing that you forged something by saying that the forgery was hard to make. It just doesn't work. You just prove that yes, you forged something. Now, whether the courts decide that AI tools have the right to just scrap content of the internet and train their models off of it, we'll have to see. That's what the lawsuit is exactly about. But in this case, OpenAI doesn't really have a defense. They're just saying, hey, you did that weirdly. Yes, but this still proves that you scrapped the articles, and that's what you're being accused of. So we'll have to let the courts decide if this is something wrong or not. Your defense just doesn't work. Now, it seems like Nintendo's attack on the Yuzu emulator had wide repercussions on the entire emulation world, as a lot of developers are stepping down or changing how to promote their tools. Citra, the DS and 3DS emulator, is now gone because it was made by the same people behind Yuzu. Pizza Boy, an emulator for GBA and Game Boy Color, is also gone. Drastic, a DS emulator, went free instead of paid and will probably be removed as well. Strato, another Switch emulator, lost its main developer. Dynamic, a tool to speed up various emulators, ended development. a contributor to Ryujin X, another Switch emulator, has stepped down, and Ether SX2, a PS2 emulator, is also gone after development was suspended a year ago. Other emulators are obviously still active, saying that they have solid legal grounds to stand on, and they're probably emulators that target consoles that are no longer sold with games that aren't purchasable anymore. But Nintendo definitely scared people away from contributing to emulators. Even the forks of yuzu are making it more difficult to use them, as they now require you to bring all the various decryption keys and the firmware from your own Switch, instead of trying to replicate or break them in the emulator itself. A lot of emulators are also no longer paywalling anything or even asking for donations to remove the "we're profiting from your work" aspect that could be used against them. All in all, it did have an important impact, even though it never went to court and there never was a ruling saying that yuzu did indeed breach Nintendo's copyright or anything else. The fact is, no one wants to fight the army of lawyers that Nintendo has, and no one has pockets deep enough to do so. And whether that's Nintendo, Sony, or anyone else, no one really wants to face that kind of stuff. It still remains that it's a terrible thing for game conservation in general. Some games can only be played through emulators these days, and if emulators disappear, then it means we lose an entire part of this medium's history, which is obviously really bad. Now, what's really good though is our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. If you're looking for a new computer and you don't really want to look all over the internet to see how well it can work on Linux, what you're gonna have to fix, or just accept that some hardware will just not run well, why not just buy a computer that supports Linux officially? Tuxedo Computers is based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they have a giant range of devices that ship with Linux pre-installed. All the hardware has been picked specifically because it runs really well with Linux. They actually submit patches upstream to fix the issues they encounter in their testing, and if those patches haven't been accepted yet, they have repos to let you install those fixes and the tools they bring to control all of that hardware. In their range, you will find something for every need and every price point. All the devices are very customizable, especially the laptops, and you can open them, repair them, and upgrade them. All I use these days is Tuxedo Computers. I run this channel on one of their notebooks, and I do all my gaming on one of their desktop PCs. They're really solid. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, and you want to support a company that actually supports Linux's development, click the link in the description below and get yourself a computer from Tuxedo. So thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, and to write a comment. And if you really want to support the channel, there are plenty of links in the description as well. And if you become a Patreon member or a YouTube member at any tier, you will get a daily Linux and open source news show from Monday to Friday. So thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!